evening and welcome to this Melbourne conversation at the Melbourne Convention and Exhibition Centre, discussing driverless cars and road safety, what the rise of the autonomous and connected vehicle will mean for you as a driver, a passenger, pedestrian, local resident, taxpayer, and so on. This is a Melbourne Conversations event, part of the City of Melbourne's free program of public talks, and held today, of course, in association with ITS Australia and the 23rd World Congress on Intelligent Transport Systems. And we acknowledge the support of our long-standing partner and venue hosts, the Melbourne Conference and Exhibition Centre. My name's Peter Mayers. I'm a contributing editor with the online magazine Inside Story. I'm a journalist and author, and it's a real pleasure to facilitate this conversation. I'm looking forward to it very much. The place we now call Melbourne hasn't always been as densely populated as it is today, but it's always been an important gathering place. For tens of thousands of years prior to European settlement, the point where the river meets the bay, where salt water meets fresh, offered seasonal food supplies capable of feeding large gatherings of people, and the different tribes of the Kulin nation would come together on the banks of the Yarra, as we are today, for ceremony and for business, to trade, to settle disputes, negotiate access to land and resources, and so on. So we acknowledge the people of the Kulin nation, traditional owners of the land on which we meet, and pay our respects to their elders past and present, in the hope that a sense of the enduring history of this place will inform our own deliberations as we look forward. We have a terrific lineup of speakers for you, so it's great to see so many of you here to hear them. A keynote presentation first by Dr. Peter Sweatman from the advisory service Kavita, and then responses from Kim Thomas of Oricon and Gavin Smith from Bosch. And of course, we'll get into a bit of a conversation together, and I'll invite your comments and questions to the panel. There's a couple of microphones at either side, so later on get ready to get up and ask your questions. When I was a kid, when my parents weren't home, I used to like watching Batman on TV, not the dark, sort of current, more recent movies, but the old-fashioned black and white, well, it was black and white at our house, TV series. And every now and again, Batman would summon his Batmobile with its remote access facility. So the driverless car has had a long purchase on our imagination, but it's no longer the stuff of science fiction. There's no need now, as there was on the set of Batman, I understand, for a crew member to drive crouched down behind the wheel so no one could see them. Companies like Google and Tesla and Audi and Mercedes-Benz have been test driving driverless cars overseas for years, and in 2015 in South Australia became the first place in the Southern Hemisphere to stage an on-road trial of a driverless car. The state government has created a $10 million research fund to support the development of the technology. And here in Melbourne, Bosch Australia has just unveiled its highly autonomous smart car, which still has a driver, but is designed to navigate roads with or without driver input, or with very little driver input. The car has been developed with $1.2 million in assistance from the Victorian government, and no doubt we'll hear more about that from Gavin Smith in the course of our discussion. Over the next 5 years, it's suggested that all new cars will have some ability to drive themselves or assist drivers in any way with technologies like automatic braking and sensing drivers falling asleep and all those sorts of things. So many of the features of the autonomous or networked or driverless vehicle are safety features. And the question we're looking at tonight is, are we looking forward to a safer driving future? To offer us an initial answer to that question and to sketch out the future landscape, I'd like to introduce Dr. Peter Sweatman, co-founding principal of Kavita, a world-class advisory service in connected and automated vehicles, Kavita. So Peter Sweatman has more than 30 years' experience in transport research and innovation and its application to the real world. He's a mechanical engineer with a PhD right here from the University of Melbourne, and has worked extensively in Europe and the Asia Pacific, as well as the United States, where he's been based for many years now. He's a former director of the University of Michigan Transportation Research Institute, and founder and former director of its Michigan Mobility Transformation Centre, which has this unique test facility, M-City. It's like a little mini city for off-roadway but real-world testing of automated vehicles. You can find a little video of it online. Bloomberg called it the world's coolest test facility, and I think Peter had a lot to do with setting it up. So I'd like to welcome, please join me in welcoming Dr. Peter Sweatman to speak about the future of automated vehicles.
Thank you, Peter, and good evening, everybody. Good evening. Great to be here, and what a wonderful conference that we're part of here. I want to compliment the host, ITS Australia, for it's been a long time coming. It's about 20 years since one of these World Congresses has been in Melbourne, so absolutely, and boy, are they making the most of it. So I know that all of the visitors from overseas are having a wonderful time. So thanks for coming out tonight. I've got if you hear any raucous cheering, that'll be a few family and friends who've shown up here to see what I really do. You know, back in my previous life in Australia, you know, I was a truck expert, and everyone, my friends and family, say, "What do you really?" And I say, "No, I'm not going to tell you. You know, otherwise everyone will be doing it." But I guess the secret's out here that I'm doing driverless vehicles and have been for a few years now. So it's a very exciting field. So it's a pleasure to introduce this tonight. And I think, okay. There's just a little crack in the drawer here where the keyboard's underneath. So after 100 years of a fairly very continuously improving transportation system consisting of vehicles, drivers, infrastructure, we're now at a tipping point. So the second 100 years of ubiquitous transportation is going to be connected, automated and shared, and this becomes transformational, and the shared part is very, very important, and that's what we're seeing. We're seeing a generation now who aren't that particularly interested in owning a motor vehicle. You know, when I was growing up in Melbourne, and my mum had a Morris Minor, and I learned to drive in the Morris Minor, and I couldn't wait to turn 18 and get my licence. So that's not the way it is anymore. So we're imposing all this technology and taking advantage over a very old system, and we shouldn't underestimate how much progress we've made with that old system. So basically, and I think I've got a slide here that shows the annual fatalities in the United States, around 35,000. And that's about the same number it's always been, and yet we travel trillions of miles every year compared to what we used to do. So it's interesting that impact on human life, and you know, if we think about it as the health issue, then it's a major health issue for society. So there are some interesting things going on. The technology is only part of the story, and this technology has to be something that users of all stripes really love. Otherwise, none of this is really going to happen, and that's the great thing about it. So we're going to have scenarios and use cases that suit the people of Melbourne that happen to have automated technologies to make them work. But the technology doesn't come first. And I'm going to just mention here that the change process that we're going through, we need some vehicles to help us through that process. And the so-called smart cities idea seems to be a very good vehicle for that, where people in a city can decide exactly how they want to move around and do more. So I'm going to be talking a little bit about connected vehicles and infrastructure, automated vehicles, AV, but there's all these waves of other technologies coming along as well, so nothing is standing still here. I mentioned shared use services are critical, you know, Uber, Lyft and so on, and others. Big data, This whole system is going to have to be secure, so cybersecurity is a big deal. In cities, everything's being wired, sensors everywhere, Internet of Things. How does transportation relate to energy use in a city, the way houses are used and so on? I mentioned smart cities, and then we look at all these enablers that have come along. So that's what's created this tipping point. We do have a century-old transportation system, and as an engineer, you want to look at a crash rate, and you want to see that coming down, and that certainly happened. And of course, Australia is a leader in road safety, and road safety experts from Australia are highly sought after and regarded all around the world because of all the progress that's been made here. But we basically don't believe that the transportation system we have, and we've had for 100 years, really is going to be sustainable for another century. And the great thing is that those of us who've been in transportation research for a long time, we tend to get branded as we're a safety expert or we're a traffic expert, emissions, energy or something. But in fact, what we're seeing now is technologies that cut right across all of those critical issues in society. So very exciting. And as I started out saying, 21st century mobility is connected, automated and shared. At the University of Michigan, where I spent 12 years, a great university, we managed to engage faculty all over the university. And normally transportation's not high on the list of tenured faculty at great universities. The reason being that we were able to contemplate a order of magnitude, that is a factor of 10, improvement in fatalities and injuries, delay in traffic, energy consumption, carbon emissions, and customer satisfaction. So as I said, this isn't something that can be regulated or forced upon anybody. This is something that everyone wants or will want. So in the US, as I said, in fact, so far this year fatalities are up 10%, so it's probably around 38,000 fatalities. Phenomenal number when you think about it. And that uptick is caused by the improvement in the economy. Economy improves, there's more travel, more exposure, and so you get more deaths. That's the way it is. And one of my colleagues from San Francisco was talking about his county, Contra Costa County, where there were 71 fatalities last year. And he's looking at each and every one of those as an offence against good order. So, when you think of a number like 38,000, it's pretty hard to, it sort of takes the tragedy out of it, but nevertheless it is. And then all the mobility issues, the time stuck in traffic, environmental impacts and so on. So not sustainable. So what we're all about, we've got these great technologies. We think, well, so far we think they're very attractive to users. So how do we make the change happen? So we do it through what we call model deployments, and we were fortunate enough to run one in Ann Arbor, which is still going. It's been going for a little over 4 years in Ann Arbor, Michigan, which is near Detroit, a city of 140,000 odd people. And we build these fake cities. And Peter mentioned M-City. It's a fake city. So we have to create dense, complex situations for these vehicle systems to be able to recognise. So it might be a pedestrian walking out from between two parked cars, and we've got to be able to, from an engineering point of view, development point of view, we've got to be able to reproduce that many, many times. Others being developed, so Willow Run is halfway between Detroit and Ann Arbor, and a 320-acre new site is being developed there with higher speeds, greater number of vehicles and so on as compared to M-City. The Rellis campus down in Texas at College Station, Texas A&M, is 10 times bigger than that, 3,000 acres. And we're going to have hundreds of vehicles orchestrated so we can learn about the smart infrastructure of the future and how traffic can be orchestrated more safely and much more efficiently. And the Momentum station in California that is in Contra Costa County. And there are others. So we need these areas where we can test automated vehicles safely. And of course, automated vehicles are being tested a lot on public roads as well. We've got connected vehicle pilots, so there's going to be 10,000 connected vehicles in New York City next year, Tampa, Wyoming for winter weather conditions for trucks moving across the states and the high country there. We've got public-private consortia underway, and universities can play a really important role in this because you need a trusted, independent agency to collect data that certainly in the United States, individuals may have concerns about the government having certain data because we are collecting, there's a lot of data coming off these vehicles. So universities are a great option for doing that kind of work. And then this year, probably the most astounding success with this Smart City Challenge that took place, a $50 million prize was won by the city of Columbus, Ohio. And that's where the cities, all 78 cities, all sat down and came up with their own ideas about how they could make life in their city better through better mobility, fairer mobility, more equitable mobility, cheaper mobility. So this is some of the stuff we put into Ann Arbor. You see a beacon up there on an intersection, and that just communicates with that vehicle. I want to just tell you a little bit about that. It doesn't look like much, but what you end up with is the vehicle is sending out messages, which we call basic safety messages, 10 times a second. And those messages are being picked up by vehicles within a short distance, say half to 1 kilometre, and also by the infrastructure. So in this case, signals at an intersection. So in a very affordable way, we build out this network of communication. So your vehicle, in case this vehicle here, is able to understand and monitor where all the vehicles are around it in various zones and whether those vehicles are getting closer or whether there's some kind of risk that it seems to be building up. So this is a very exciting technology, and it's not automation. This is something that goes with automation, and a lot of people kind of you get very excited about automation, but they ought to get excited about this connected vehicle technology. That's M-City. You see that big block M there on that traffic circle. And so, that wasn't quite finished when that picture was taken, but there are building facades and all kinds of rail crossings and a tunnel and various things to make sure that these machines are able to operate under a wide variety of conditions. So we're going to see this connected vehicle and automated vehicle rollout, and I won't go into too much detail, but there is actually a rulemaking in the United States for this connected vehicle technology because of its life-saving potential. So the connected vehicle technology alone is capable of addressing 80% of those serious crashes, and I gave you that big number of how many crashes there are. So that's just connectivity, that's not automation. But this underpins a lot of other things, including automation. So as that mandate kicks in, we're going to quickly get to 150 million connected vehicles. I won't go through all the aficionados at the conference love all these acronyms, but I won't go too much there. So what we're saying is that by 2025 we're going to have a very happy convergence of connected vehicle technology and automated vehicles. So the connected technology is sending messages to vehicles near you saying, this is my position, this is my speed, this is my heading. And it might also, if you choose, broadcast the length of your vehicle. So if it's a big semi-trailer or something, additional information can be broadcast so that your vehicle knows what's around it, and you don't necessarily need to or not capable of knowing all that stuff. It can also see around corners, so if somebody's running a red light across your path, then it will pick that up. And the automated side is progressing in its own way with trials and smart cities deployments and so on. And we expect all this to come together in 2025 so that we'll be able to have a on-demand mobility services with automated vehicles. So how do we get our arms around this, and how do we actually move it forward? Because, as I said, in the United States we've got trillions of trips every year with cars, with people driving them. It's a pretty big system to try to change. So we think about scenarios, and again this comes back to a user experience. So a couple that we've looked at in the last couple of years are platooning of vehicles in a suitable situation, an automated city centre where a privately owned vehicles, so you get to a certain precinct and then you relinquish control and the traffic is orchestrated, you're directed to your vehicle parks itself and so on. And then the third case being an on-demand, fully automated driverless taxi. And the Europeans have been pretty good on this, and there's a couple of different products available. And we were hearing today about some deployments of these here in Australia, in Western Australia and South Australia. And I'm sure this will happen in Victoria and the other states. Every state's going to be doing this for sure. So these use cases are really important because we can't just think about cars the way we used to. Cars have to meet a certain safety standard. If they do, they go anywhere and do anything. It's not going to be like that. These are going to be more specific. So, and then the US DOT considered some other interesting use cases like riderless delivery motorcycles, vehicles that are highly automated but might look like current vehicles and others may not, and so on. So, please go out there and invent some use cases. So a lot of issues on the automation side that need to be solved, and I don't have time to go through them all, but clearly we need to create a safe transition. And one way to do that, if we look at the winning smart city, Columbus, Ohio, then what are they doing? They've got self-driving vehicles from a transit centre. They've got a bunch of partners signed up. And if you look at the data analytics is a very important part. So, and then you look at the societal side of this, that Linden neighbourhood is a very poor neighbourhood. So the idea there is to create access to job opportunities through mobility, through innovative provision of mobility. And overall, it's all about access to jobs. So we bring new mobility into the service of that particular city. And then the 78 cities all had different ideas about how they would do that. So that's very exciting. I'm just going to finish off, Peter, with where I'm actually going to talk about the subject at hand. In summary, driverless cars will be 10 times safer than human-driven cars because we're taking that human lapse, human error out of the system. So that's very compelling. We need to get there. We need to have that. We can't afford to go for another 100 years with all that human error and more travel and more fatalities. So we will navigate the transition that's required, bearing in mind that motor vehicle safety regulations are a 50-year art form that's been developed, and the advent of automated vehicles is going to change things. And the way it's been done for 50 years is you regulate everything upstream, as far upstream as you can at the national level, the highest level, first upstream, and you come up with a reasonable approach to being confident that those vehicles are going to be safe. But what we're moving to is a more real-time data, so we actually see what is happening. So we're going from reasonable to real, and that really makes this possible, because otherwise we might be concerned about putting very new technologies out there. But the data side of this is really what we need to have, data and analytics. And we won't see this automated future until the system is sufficiently secure. It's not that attractive to hack cars at the moment. People do it for Wired magazine or whatever to get an article, but when we have a fully automated system on demand, there might be a little bit more of a brownie points for hacking into something like that, for whatever motivates hackers. So thank you all, and I look forward to the discussion, and once again it's exciting and wonderful to be in Melbourne. Thank you.
I'll get you to grab a seat over here. Right. Thank you very much, Peter, and the idea of a riderless delivery motorcycle somehow sends shivers down my spine, but I suppose it's, given that human error is the problem often, maybe it's a good thing. I'd like now to introduce our two other panellists to join and invite them to join Peter on the comfy chairs here to respond to the presentation and engage in conversation. So our two speakers are Kim Thomas from the consulting engineering firm Oricon. She leads their work on intelligent transport systems in Australia and New Zealand. She has qualifications in physics and engineering and 23 years experience in the field, particularly software and systems engineer in infrastructure and systems design, so she combines mathematical modelling skills, traffic engineering and IT knowledge into systems and software engineering for intelligent transport. So those ramp-on lights that help keep the traffic flowing really well on freeways, that sort of thing is Kim's bread and butter, and she's worked on highly complex urban and rural infrastructure projects in Australia and internationally. And our other speaker is Gavin Smith. He's President and Chairman of Robert Bosch Australia. He's been in that role since 2011, having joined the firm in 1990, worked for them in Frankfurt, and then also here in Australia, leading their regional powertrain and vehicle safety systems divisions. Gavin's also a director of Stillwell Motor Group and the German-Australian Chamber of Industry and Commerce. I think he's just abandoned the German ambassador to come and join us here. And he's been appointed to the Prime Minister's Industry Task Force, 4.0 Task Force, to chair the work group on security of network systems, which clearly, from what Peter told us, is going to be a very relevant issue. So please welcome Gavin Smith and Kim Thomas to join us. Gavin, why don't you start? And just interested to hear your response to what Peter said, and perhaps tell us a bit about the Bosch highly autonomous vehicle as well, or nearly autonomous vehicle.
Well, I guess everyone has an opinion on driverless cars and technology. And it's interesting when you hear other people speak that right now I can take no exception to anything that Peter said. None whatsoever. It fits really well with our perspectives and our outlook for when cars will come with automated features, why they will come and why it's necessary for them to come. So Peter was talking about, a century-old transportation system. In my keynote speech that I gave a couple of days ago, I was also talking about, we're at a tipping point for the vehicles that we see on our roads. And it's almost a modern-day equivalent of going from horse and carriage to horseless carriages. So what we're talking about now is the modern day equivalent of that disruptive change in the transportation system. But there has been nothing like it, literally, since those days. The motor vehicle was, in its modern form, invented by Carl Benz back in the 1880s, despite the fact that that was the the modern car at the time. It came after a long period of development to get to that stage, and we're at that point again. The motor vehicle has evolved for 100 years, but if you look at it today, it's not that different to the one that Carl Benz developed. Internal combustion engine, steering wheel, controls. The model has gone unchallenged. But now we're at a point where connectivity, automation, electrification basically turn everything on its ear for the better, in our opinion. So what Peter was referring to also, for those of you that haven't been privy to the announcements made in the last days, Bosch have been working on automated vehicle technology for a long time as well. Generally speaking, people think Google were the first ones to bring automated vehicles to the mass perception. That's not true. I can actually go back as far back as 1954 when Walt Disney released a cartoon-style video called Magic Highway, in which he predicted a lot of the things that we're talking about now. So it's not a new topic. Those of you that remember the series Knight Rider with David Hasselhoff already have this view of the fantasy that is the modern automated car. What we have today running around on the streets in Melbourne and down at Albert Park is not quite the kit car. You can't whistle it up and have it arrive, but the technology is literally on the horizon where we will be able to do that. So we see it pretty much as Peter has described, the most disruptive time in the history of the evolution of the motor vehicle.
Okay, thanks, Gavin. Kim?
I've been jotting down notes as Peter's been talking because it's just such a huge topic for us. In our space, what we look at is we deliver infrastructure design most of the time. So the bulk of our work is designing those managed motorways that you see, the road signage that goes on gantries above the road, and the ramp signalling, traffic signal design, lighting, and so forth. Now, if you look at that, those gantries are typically around between $500,000 and $1 million a pop. And these gantries are rolled out extensively across our motorway networks because they're there to improve the safety and operations of those networks. Now, once you start introducing vehicles that can make themselves safe and operate more efficiently through receiving messages from an overarching control system that is remote, all of a sudden you don't really need those gantries anymore. So we are looking at the implications of all of this for infrastructure into the future. The trick is, these cars are going to be slowly introduced, and there's going to be a blend of driverless vehicles and at various levels of automation over time. And those are going to be mixed with pretty old wrecks that are on our motorways at the moment. So you can't actually change things over too quickly because that would be unsafe. You still have to cater for all of the older vehicles in the fleet. So it's quite an interesting problem for us to be grappling with as infrastructure designers. When we put in a gantry, do we make it a 50-year gantry, or do we make it a 25-year gantry? Or do we make it a 15-year gantry? We just don't really know too well at this stage. So that was the one thing. The other side of it for us is we look at network operations and how to improve network efficiency, get traffic flowing better. And if you're looking at that, a lot of what we do is we look at the traffic signal control systems. SCATS is used in Melbourne and in a large part of the country. And we look at optimizing how people get through traffic signals. Now, once again, once we have much more automated vehicles in our network, will we need traffic signals? Because we could quite feasibly allow these cars to negotiate with each other to go through the signals without having any signals there. Only problem being, we have pedestrians and we have to tell them what to do. Those
pesky pedestrians. They really get in the way, don't they?
So we still have to have some instrumentation on the roads, but it's just where it's all going. So that's probably... and then, of course, we're already looking at what we can do around big data and what we can look at in terms of analytics and how we can improve network operations with the increasing flow of data that's available out of our networks. It's just such a great big topic. It's fascinating.
So, it strikes me in listening to you all speak. I mean, we tend to, I suppose the media concentrates on the smart car, you know, the car that can be driverless. But the driverless car is actually going to depend on a whole lot of other infrastructure, isn't it? It's not just the car, but it's the environment as well.
No.
No?
No.
Okay.
And that's one of the myths of driverless cars. You don't need the infrastructure to change to get many of the benefits that can come from automated driving. The change in infrastructure helps and it makes it better. But today you can have highly automated cars on the road. Technically it's more challenging for us as component manufacturers and vehicle manufacturers to build them, because we need more accurate GPS, we need radar, we need LiDAR, we need stereo video cameras, we need sonar sensing, so the car has to be able to see and react to everything in its environment. But we can do that. However, when you start putting connectivity and smart infrastructure in place, so traffic lights can talk to cars, or other cars can talk to cross traffic, then clearly that gets easier, because rather than having to detect and decide, you actually have direct communication. And that's part of the demonstration we're doing around Albert Park as well. We have a motorcycle fitted with vehicle-to-vehicle communications, so our car, which is operating in highly autonomous mode, always knows where it is. But, as Kim was saying, when will we have every vehicle with vehicle transmission capability in it? We have a big car park, which has an average age of 10 years. It will take decades to cycle out all of the old cars, and even then, there will be still some on the road because they're classics, they're what the Germans would call old-timers that people have in their garage for the sunny Sunday that they bring out once a month. And how do you deal with them?
My neighbour's got 4 of them. He's a classic car enthusiast, and he's got sort of one from each era, and I don't think he's going to give them up in a hurry.
I get attacked on this topic a lot. We hate what you're doing, is the response by people of my generation who say they love driving, and where will they get to use their old BMW or their old Ford or their old Holden, because it won't have this capability. And will we eventually regulate such that 90% of the cars on the road decide what is allowed, and the 10% that come out once every 3 weeks aren't allowed out anymore?
Maybe they'll be allowed out on Sundays or something. So Peter, this interaction between the car and the technology of the car and the environment, I guess, because one of your slides showed the signal up on the sign, or as I understand it, the car, you can have all the sensors that you talked about, Gavin, where the car is actually sending out signals and watching, looking, video, LiDAR, which is, I can't remember what the acronym stands for, but $70,000 a pop, I think, at the moment still, so not on the shelf yet. But you can also have the connectivity where the car is connected to everything else around it and knows what else is going on.
Yeah, so you don't have to rely, the word autonomous gets used sometimes, and to me that means everything's self-contained in the vehicle, and the sensors, the machine vision, the radars and so on are enough to pick up enough about the surrounding environment that the vehicle is safe and can proceed. But this wireless communication not only supplants some of that pressure on the vision side of things, but also can actually, as I said, bring in information about how long a vehicle is, or maybe that the anti-lock brakes have just deployed, or there's been some dramatic manoeuvre of that other vehicle. So all of that kind of information can be transferred. But our assumption is that automated vehicles have to be able to operate on regular roads with everything that's going on, and that's why we built M-City the way we did. We always said, well, we want to create the dense, complex urban environment, which is the hardest environment for an automated vehicle to operate in, and they have to be able to do it. If we were able to do something with the infrastructure especially, that would be even better. And I'm sure some cities will have precincts, so maybe they'll allow a vehicle that's fitted with this communication equipment or automation or some combination to operate get some advantage by getting access somewhere that they wouldn't otherwise have. So we're going to see a lot of interesting developments like that. But traditionally, the infrastructure is kind of underdone part of the system. So, if you go out there and look at the freeways leading to the Westgate Bridge, the value of the vehicles travelling down a mile of that freeway is 5 to 10 times the value of the infrastructure that they're travelling on. And the same will apply with these new technologies. So the cost in the vehicle is about 5 times what it costs to put it in the infrastructure. So there seems to be some law of infrastructure doesn't get much more than 20%, but that's the way things are, and we can't assume that things are going to change like that.
So Kim, would you see the rolling out of appropriate infrastructure to support smart vehicles as being a key to this transition? Because you talked about the difficulty is when we have a mix of autonomous vehicles and old timers like me maybe on the road, sort of finding our way around as we always have done.
As Gavin said, we really don't necessarily need infrastructure. It's just whether we want to leverage all of that information we can get from the autonomous vehicles to help with getting more efficient flow across our networks. I'm getting a bit echoey here. So one of the things I've been very interested in trying to see happen in our different regional areas and cities is getting a bit more of that cooperative ITS communications equipment installed when we are putting in new equipment. There are great opportunities.
So the sort of thing we should be thinking about now.
Absolutely.
It should already be on the agenda. And is it, or? It's
getting there. Right. We're seeing pilots and studies that are going on in the different states. I think the whole thing with this is I was saying to you before, when we first got mobile phones, we had no appreciation of what these would be like to us in 10, 15, 20 years' time. We have no appreciation of the changes that this is going to cause to our communities. And the only way we can start to understand that is if we start trying and put the equipment in. There are real options to put devices into our traffic signal controllers and start building up a wide area network of these devices that can start collecting data from any equipped vehicles and start trying to use some analytics to do something useful with our networks.
And do we know what the technology is for that? Or because, technology is so unstable, you might introduce something and then in 5 years say, oh, well, actually we picked the wrong, we picked Betamax.
Well, the great thing with ITS is it's obsolete in around about 5 to 7 years anyway.
Right.
So when you put it in, you have an expectation it's going to be going fairly soon too. So this is a good thing because if we were having expectations for it to last longer, we'd be stuck with it.
Right.
But Peter, the type of communication that I was referring to, we call it dedicated short-range communication, that in the United States that bandwidth was reserved for safety purposes about 15 years ago. And the wireless regime that's used there was standardised by international bodies, and there's nothing wrong with it. We just haven't used it. So,
and is that reserved here in Australia as well?
Yes, they've just reserved it. It's so-called 5.9 gigahertz. So that's a great step forward. Once we've got that spectrum, and of course in the States we're fighting a rearguard action because the spectrum is worth a lot of money, right? So it's hard to keep it reserved, and that's another reason we need to move quickly and use it, because if we don't,
someone else will grab it.
Yeah. Absolutely.
I was having a discussion with some of the colleagues who are over from the United States, from Oakland, and we were talking about, how do you fund some of the work that needs to be done? So where does the money come from for the infrastructure or for the pilots or the trials? And, for us in Victoria, the Transport Accident Corporation, the Victorian government, have been extremely supportive of the development work we're doing. And it's no secret, the government have put in a 7-digit sum of money to allow us to engineer this car and bring it to market here and to demonstrate it. But that's a very small percentage of what's in total been spent by the company to do this so far. But when you think about it, the cost of road toll, the cost of the carnage, the cost to insurers and to the public of accidents on the road, I wonder whether we can't actually do something to put vehicle-to-vehicle communications devices in the whole car park, funded out of a levy in our registration, which is already there, and paid for over time because of the reduction in accidents.
Paid
for by the reduction in accidents, maybe with a 12-month lag, because there will be a lead and a lag. There's a lead in cost and there's a lag in benefit.
So there's a very good basis for that, for just that. One of my colleagues at Princeton, he says his argument is, if the insurance industry paid all of the costs for connectivity and automation, everything that would be required to roll this out, they would still make more profit than they're making now.
Yeah.
So,
But so of course then they'd have to lower their, if we reduced traffic accidents so dramatically, they'd have to lower their premiums a lot as well. So that
Yeah, but to be honest, lowering the premiums, the insurance companies don't mind. What they don't want to do is necessarily
payouts.
lower their returns.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
if it reduces their risk and their premiums are lower, that's actually still good business.
So I mean, the idea of providing, you know, maybe a levy through our registration fees or whatever, to get that across the line, you're going to have to convince the general public and voters that this is something they should agree to. And I suspect that. Can you hold your questions till later? Thanks. I suspect there's going to be some resistance. You know, there's going to be people feeling, well, I'm a safe driver. You know, I don't trust these autonomous vehicles. Things go wrong. You know, my computer goes wrong, so why won't my car go wrong? I mean, so is that an issue, the whole public perception?
well, the thing about, you know, we've had a long experience from a safety perspective of bringing new technologies forward and so on. And, you know, generally speaking, if people buy a motor vehicle, they want a really good sound system, and, you know, they may option some of the advanced safety systems, but often they don't. And the reason is because they think, well, first of all, it's the so-called Lake Wobegon factor that says, you know, we're all above average, and I'm especially above average, so that's never going to happen to me. I'm not going to need that, and that's kind of true. I mean, there's a fatal crash every 200 million kilometres, so you know, so these things are rare events. The beautiful thing about this connected technology is people they get value out of it every day.
Yeah.
So as soon as Gavin says, once you start, and Kim said, you know, we put this technology at the intersections, we put it in the signals, that's the easiest way to do it. The companies that make the signals are doing it anyway. They're going to do it anyway. And so that you get a message and it reminds you, yes, I've got that, or I'm getting added value out of this. It's not costing me anything, really. Plus, when the crunch comes and I'm about to have a serious crash, it's going to save my life.
But go on, Gavin. Yeah.
I was going to draw a comparison. Our company, over 130 years, has been known as a maker of things. Whether it's fridges or washing machines or drills or car parts, we've been a things company. 4 years ago, our CEO said, we are such an important part of the economy that we cannot afford not to be an Internet of Things company. And strategically, we decided we will put connectivity into every single product we make that uses electricity and has any form of electronic control, whether we understand the benefits or not. And the reason we can do that is that the cost of connectivity is now so low, the marginal cost to build it in is insignificant. So when you buy a drill from Bosch, it will have internet connectivity chips inside. Same with the washing machine, same with the hand blender, same with the oven, same with the alternator in the car.
And this opens up the possibility for us as consumers to work out how to use it.
Exactly right.
Yeah.
Even if we don't know what the benefit is, when it's built in, smart people who can actually understand how to leverage that connectivity and deliver benefit to end users will start doing that.
Yeah.
And the same thing comes with smart transportation, intelligent transportation systems. The cost of putting the connectivity into the traffic lights incrementally is low, but someone needs to decide to do it, even if there is no yet application and no pull.
So, Kim, that suggests there is a role for government here in sort of taking a lead and regulating and saying, look, we want this in the new gantry, at least, because it should be future-proofed in that sense.
It is actually quite an issue for us when we are delivering designs, because we have to conform to specifications. So we will certainly sit with our government clients and organisations like Transurban, major players, and suggest changes, suggest enhancements, all the rest of it. But there is a very complex process called the type approval process, which basically gives certification to devices, equipment, and so forth. And so it can be pretty challenging to get that sort of thing through. But that's the one side of it. The other side, I think, is going to be absolutely market-driven. The moment we start making data available, we'll have all sorts of app developers and entities out there finding amazing uses for this that we've never conceived of.
Yeah. Yep.
So there's huge potential. Let's talk about some of the practical things. I mean, I think we're all aware that the transition complicates. You know, the fact that you'll have different types of vehicles interacting on the road, but you've suggested it's not insurmountable as a problem. But is it also, so the transition is not going to be, it's clearly not going to be a hard cutover. One day we have vehicles we drive and one day we have automated vehicles. No. It's going to be a gradual thing, and it'll be gradual too, won't it, in the sense that cars already have elements of this and they're going to get them increasingly. So increasingly cars will have driver assistance of various types before they become autonomous. Is that the way the product will progress?
Yeah, so, I think a lot of people feel that this is going to go in stages, particularly automation, but also if you think about a density of the deployment of the technology in a typical traffic stream. So in Ann Arbor, we had about a 5% of equipped vehicles in the traffic stream. But that was enough to influence the behaviour of the whole traffic stream.
For the better?
Yes. So for example, one of the applications was probably the most popular with the users was the stoplight, so-called stoplight application. So a vehicle is doing an emergency braking 5 vehicles ahead of yours. You can't even see that vehicle, but your vehicle gets a message about that, and so it smooths everything out. So the more vehicles you have that are equipped to do that, then you get a greater effect on the behaviour of the traffic stream.
So you mentioned platooning in your slides, and I didn't quite understand what that meant, but I'm guessing that meant, say you're on a freeway, on the Hume Highway or something, that cars will be kept at a certain distance from one another, so they're kind of in convoy but they're not at risk to one. Is that the...
Yeah, well, the early adopter there is the freight vehicle. So there's there was an amazing demonstration in Europe earlier this year where 5 convoys of trucks, platoons of trucks converged on Rotterdam. You'd think Australia, I used to be involved in the freight industry here and love those big trucks, but the Europeans got in ahead of Australia on this.
That's incredible.
And so you can have 1 or 2 vehicles at close headway behind the lead vehicle. Very, very cheap technology. And there's a 10% fuel saving for the truck. So how else do you get a 10% fuel saving on a truck? You just can't. So
it's almost like automated train signalling to keep the flow going. And
yes, and there's no reason why cars can't convoy as well. And something we've thought about, but we haven't had a big enough deployment to really see it with this connected vehicle technology. If you're doing a long trip, if you're driving from Detroit to Chicago, you could choose to travel with vehicles that are equipped. Okay. So you could, on a long trip, you're looking around, you wonder, I think I'll keep away from them. I want to, and so you kind of self-select a little bit.
The drivers you hang out with.
Yeah, and the more of those vehicles you have around you, the safer you're going to be. So.
Gavin, can I ask you, what about as the car becomes increasingly helpful to us?
Yes.
Is there a risk that we become increasingly lazy as drivers? So,
yes.
I know... Right, okay.
I don't know. To be honest, I don't know if it's a risk because I think as drivers we're pretty lazy anyway. Right. I mean, Peter made a comment that I made earlier in the week as well. We all think that we are better than average drivers. We can't be. Some of us have to be worse than average. Yeah. Otherwise, average wouldn't exist. And, one of the comments I make is that actually I don't even know if we are even average. I think most of us are pretty ordinary. When you look at how we behave and the fact that more than 90% of traffic accidents, crashes are caused by human error, that means we fail.
But I guess what I'm suggesting is that couldn't that risk be exaggerated by the fact that I ride a bicycle a lot. I see a lot of people texting in their cars as I ride by, and they're going to think, well, the car will sort this out. It's going to know when to brake, so I can look at my phone while I'm driving.
And that's what we hope, because if the car is making the decisions, it will avoid that we have crashes because it is always paying attention. Where we get distracted, we get irritable, we get tired, we have micro sleeps. You know, again, technology can help us solve a lot of problems. We have to be prepared to embrace it. Even today, we could put in driver monitoring solutions in cars where there is a camera focused on the driver. And we do this. We have demonstrations of it too. And based on where the driver is looking, we can detect whether they have not seen the motorcycle approaching from the right because their eyes have never actually been turned far enough to see it. And we can see whether they are going to brake.
You can tell where they're looking down at their lap and doing this, and
exactly.
or if they're nodding off, I guess.
And you know, this, when we talk about the evolution of the motor vehicle, there are many, many technologies which have come to the car which take us on the path to high automation. And there are still some that will come. So this driver drowsiness detection, this driver attention deficit detection is not that difficult to introduce now. The technology is coming to market as we speak. And when you have that, and you have vehicle-to-vehicle communications, and you have some of these high automation functions, we're already a long way down the track to having an environment where people will cede control happily because it is better than the alternative.
It's very interesting to talk to the young folks who work for Google, and they're the pilots, I guess the custodians of the driverless Google cars as they go out and do their millions of miles out on the roadways. And so one thing a Google car does is if a vehicle in the adjacent lane is moving around a lot or in some erratic way, then the Google car moves across in its lane in response to that. And so these
keeps its distance, as it were.
Yes, so these young folks, so you're getting a little further away. These young folks, because they're not required to drive, they may need to do something occasionally. And so so the first thing they notice is their car moved over. And then they notice, oh yeah, that car is behaving erratically. But they don't notice it first. The machine picks it up. And then they kind of validate it.
But what about the, you know, there are things humans are deductive. You know, so if I'm driving along and I see a ball roll out in front of me on the road, I will be aware that a kid might run after it. Now, how is a car going to make that deductive leap?
Have you heard of machine learning?
Yeah, I have.
So it's only a matter of time. You're right, the human brain can do a lot more than the smartest computer in any car today. But again, the machines will learn over time that if a ball comes out on the road, by statistics, someone put that ball there and it will have learned that potentially means that
you don't want it to learn
through
the process of hit.
No, but it doesn't have to.
Right.
It doesn't have to. I mean, these are typical use cases that you can program into the machine and it will then continue to learn. So I don't have any fear that the deductive reasoning of human beings is what will make cars safer if they continue to drive them. I think that is such a small part that we as operators of machines contribute. The rest of it is going to be so much more beneficial. We won't miss out on much.
Well, Kim, what about bigger level threats? So rather than the car itself, but you know, if all the vehicles and all the systems are connected, what about threats like complete system failures? You know, the wireless system dropping out, someone hacking the system, these sorts of things. Is that going to be where the threats lie?
In terms of simple system failures where we're not talking hacking, I think the cars fundamentally are able to look after themselves, first off. So yes, it's a concern, but I think it's more of a concern in terms of network efficiency and operations rather than necessarily the safety of
So you mean if the lights stopped working and those sorts of things, the cars would actually be better able to handle that than we ordinary mortals can?
We would be right now. The security element is a concern, and there's a lot of work going on around how we manage the handshaking between two cars for an intermittent conversation versus a longer conversation. So there's a lot of work, you know, going on around this, and I think it is a real concern, and it's going to be something we have to be watching out for and addressing and working against forever.
Peter, is that? I mean, you mentioned cybersecurity. Is that? Because if you could take out the traffic in a city, that's a pretty, you know.
Yeah, I mean, there hasn't been a lot of hacking of vehicles. As I said, from magazine articles and so on. But so we need to be prepared for the fact that even, a highly automated vehicle, occasionally all hell's going to break loose and the machine's going to break down and it'll safely park itself. And so one of the discussions is,
so that would be the default response when things go wrong, pull over, park.
Yes.
Yeah. Wait for the RACV like in the old days. Yeah.
So I think there'll be various levels of these things. So, the driver may need to re-engage, under some conditions. So if the redundancy's dropped out and so on, then, with a certain amount of warning, the driver, and especially with connectivity, you'd get that warning. So if there's roadworks,
because
ahead,
a driver can't re-engage in a crash type situation. There just won't be time, right?
But if there's roadworks coming up ahead, then the connected vehicle information will tell your vehicle that that's the case. So you may choose to re-engage at that point, so you don't have to do anything in a big rush. But so there are various levels of intervention and eventualities if there's a major problem with the technology. But
there's also a massive amount of redundancy out there.
So explain what you mean by a massive amount of redundancy.
Well, even now, when we put in roadside infrastructure, we put in communications fibre down both sides of the road. This allows us to have a complete loop for the communication. So if one part breaks, it goes the other way. So we've already got that sort of infrastructure. Once we start, I expect what we're going to see is a whole lot more wireless communications. So we've got the wireless communications I talked about where we put equipment in the traffic signal controllers. I expect we're going to see that across our motorway networks as well, as wireless communications become considerably more reliable than they are right now. So
is that a safe assumption that wireless communications will become considerably more reliable and that they'll be able to handle the volume of information that
they're getting better and better and better. We're looking at a whole series of increasing the broad bandwidth technologies and greater reliability. I wouldn't try and do it now, but 5 years' time, 10 years' time, I think we're going to be in pretty much the right space.
One of the things I read from, I think it was KPMG, said that in the UK, self-driving cars will lead to 2,500 fewer deaths between now and 2030. So about 1,800 people are killed on average on UK roads every year. So that's suggesting 150 lives saved a year on average. Quick bit of maths there. Now, do you think that's a good estimate, or do you think the gains are potentially greater than that, or?
We're saying 90% of accidents are caused by human error. I would have thought it would be a better number than that.
So it's when we talk about automation, we need to be a little bit specific. So it's such a diverse concept that it's hard to relate to a number like that. But I like what Kim said, that we know that 90% of serious crashes are caused by human lapse, human error. So we're going to remove that. But even, as I said, the connected vehicle and infrastructure technology, which we started on before automation came along, that addresses 80% of serious crashes. So whichever way you look at it, in a sense, we're not, the safety advocates of the world aren't stepping out there and saying we're going to save X number of lives through automation in the next 5 years. I don't think anyone's really doing that. But what we're talking about is going successfully through a transition till we get a high proportion of automation, and then we'll be set up for a century of safe driving, of sustainable mobility.
I mean, we've been making, as you said earlier, remarkable progress anyway on reducing the death toll. I mean, in Australia, road fatalities fell by 25% over the past decade, and as a proportion of the amount of people, it's falling much faster than that, of course, because the population is growing. So let's take our first. But I mean, because I know Sweden has an idea of a zero road toll. So I mean, that's the ideal future, I guess, isn't it?
And I think that was considered to be excessively Swedish by a lot of people. But I hear it from a lot of people now, and we hear it from in the US quite a bit. So,
well, there's the recent Traffic Accident Commission ad here, which has they asked people, vox popping people, what do you think would be a reasonable road toll? It was 180 last year, and people say, 75 and whatever, and then they present them with 75 members of their own family, and they say, maybe 75 is too many. Okay, we have an enthusiastic contributor here.
Yeah. Nick Swed, I've worked in road safety for quite a while, so I think Vision Zero is actually Vision 10% of now, like 90% of the human era. But my question is about, I want to drive an autonomous vehicle when I'm in my 90s. I think it'll take that long, but I want a manual autonomous vehicle.
Why?
Why, yeah.
Especially when you're
Because I want to be able to drive it and be in control. I've got emergency braking in my vehicle, but it only comes in when I exceed, if I don't react fast enough. I've got lane control in it. It only kicks in if I don't control it. I've got anti-skid if I brake too hard, ESC if I go too hard. So it only kicks in when I err. So my autonomous vision of the future is a totally autonomous car, but I'm in charge of it unless I go outside of that envelope. Can I have that vehicle?
All right. Do you think that's what people are going to... I mean, one of the things you said, Peter, is that we're going to have to love this. The people are going to have to want it. And there are a lot of people who buy cars for image, for what it says about them. And you're suggesting a shared future, which, not a lot of people are going to love the look of that taxi you showed us. Are people going to want at least a sense of control, even if they're not really in control?
Well,
a wheel to hold on to.
It's interesting that little shuttle thing. So they've been operating one in Western Australia. We just heard about it today. And so that was an opt-in, people sign up because you had to sign up and say, I'm interested in using this. They're inundated. Inundated. Yeah. So people...
So what's it shuttling between? Is it...
It's kind of a precinct. I think it's not a long distance or anything like that. I mean, these shuttles tend to be deployed in either a business precinct, like a business park or something like that, a shopping precinct, an airport. They're putting one in.
It could be deployed. I mean, Perth, where they've got all those park and ride railway stations along the Kawana Freeway, it could be deployed potentially to bring people to and from their homes to meet the train, that sort of stuff.
Yes, exactly. So, but I think a lot of people are fascinated by the idea that they can use their smartphone to call up a ride, and it's going to, it's Uber without the driver, and of course that's exactly what Uber want to do, and all of their competitors. So that's where this is heading, and people love that. They certainly Americans want to use their time better, so they're not really interested in changing gears, and
I'd like to add to that comment as well. I'm a petrol head. At age 53, I race cars, I race motorbikes, I love old cars, I love new cars, sports cars, anything that sounds good and goes. That's me. But 90% of the driving I do isn't that. It's not fun. It's not good being in the car, changing the gears and being in control, because it's just a daily grind to and from the office, in and out of the city. 10% of the driving I do, I would say I enjoy. And the rest of it is just time lost, where I'd rather be doing something else. Reading a book.
I couldn't agree more.
Catching up with email, talking to the family, other stuff. But in that 10%, I'm with you. But for that 10%, I think I would actually willingly sacrifice that if it meant the other 90% was better. And I think we might be able to have both, but I think one of the other topics, I've got a 10-year-old and an 8-year-old daughter, and no disrespect to you or me or any of us else on the panel, we're getting on a bit. It's not actually so much about us.
What we want.
Their first cars will have levels of automation in it that they'll take for granted, and they'll never miss the driving experience because they won't know it. And that's what we're really thinking about. What will the next generation...
I couldn't agree more, and I think I felt I glimpsed the future recently when I drove from Ann Arbor down to Columbus, and when I got into over the line into Ohio, there's 50 miles of roadworks, and this is 2 lanes which are narrower than normal, with huge concrete walls either side. 1 lane is full of just all trucks. In fact, the trucks are told you will be in this lane, and 50 miles. So that's what we're going to be dealing with in America in 20 years. That's going to be everywhere like that. And boy, I'm thinking, I need that automate. You know, if everyone was automated or connected, even in that situation, how much stress would that take out of the situation? So,
Kim?
Yeah, the other implication of not having to drive your car is that you can add your commute to your work hours.
Yeah.
In other words, you're reducing your work hours by taking that hour that you drive into work as part of your work day. So
Either that or you're adding to your work hours by...
Well, fingers crossed that's not the option. But and the other element of this is that for all of those urban developments, or the outer ring of urban developments, which are low-value properties, all of a sudden they don't necessarily need to be low-value properties because it is not unattractive to drive those long distances into work. So I come from Brisbane, and I know a lot of British people that moved to Australia and thought, it'd be great to live in Noosa, which is, an hour and a half, 2 hours out of Brisbane, and then they commute to Brisbane. It wouldn't matter if you had an autonomous vehicle.
Yeah, because time would be, as you say, useful time.
You can use
almost
it
as good as being on the train, in fact. Okay, we'll take another question here.
Yes, how you going? It's my name is Ray Debit, ITS Program Delivery Manager for Down Michelle. Just got a comment. The way I see is, there was also a comment where we said we had to convince the public that we need this type of technology. I sort of relate it to the analog digital type for TV, where we didn't have to ask the community. It became a mandate once the technology has been proven. So a similar thing, once the technology becomes proven and accepted, it'll become mandated. And the other comment in regards to new vehicles versus old vehicles. So obviously the new vehicles will have the whole connected and autonomous vehicle. For the older type vehicles, you wouldn't need to have the autonomous component, but potentially a black box which will have the communication component will then become mandatory as part of your registration, right?
So like we got the set-top box on the old analog TV.
For the TV. So then when you go register your vehicle, your car cannot be registered unless you have this black box, which will provide at least a component of what we're trying to work towards. Just another comment in regards, a movie comes to my mind for Demolition Man, right? In Demolition Man, you've got an autonomous vehicle which drives itself, and what I find, maybe I'm wrong, but most of the congestion occurs on our motorways, right? If you've got glare, people start to slow down, and obviously that causes a chain reaction effect of all slow vehicles, which will then overfill to all the side roads. So potentially, I'm not sure, maybe have autonomous on the main highways, and then you get re-engaged for the guys because obviously the slower the speed, the less chance that anyone's going to have an incident or accident on slow roads.
Okay, I'm going to take that as a comment because I realise I'm neglecting this side of the room, so I'll take the question from over here and then...
Okay.
Yep.
Is that coming through?
Yep.
First, 2 related questions. When do you think driverless cars will start appearing on the roads in Melbourne? And it's a guess, obviously. And when will affordable cars be available in Australia?
You mean affordable driverless cars?
Affordable driverless cars, yes.
Okay.
So for the average person, say, $30,000 to $50,000. But first
20 to 30. Yeah. Okay. All right.
I'd love to make a comment because I see a huge opportunity here in Australia and in Melbourne and around Australia on the infrastructure side. We've got in Australia here, you have some of the best companies in the world when it comes to some of this technology for communication and for smart traffic signals and so on, right here in Australia. So the idea of, especially given the current status with the automotive industry here, then it gives us a chance to deploy to be the first country to have a really good deployment in the infrastructure, because that's going to attract.
So you think we could lead the way? Australia could lead the way?
Absolutely, because in the US we're still struggling with the idea, with the concept of who's going to pay for the deployment in the infrastructure. So if that initiative were taken here, that would accelerate this process dramatically.
Gavin, when are we going to see the first driverless cars on Melbourne roads?
They're here.
But as part of your test cars here.
I mean, if you go home at night time,
they're here already.
It's not worth a comment. You don't go home and say, golly gee, I saw a driverless car. When will it be? You see a number of them.
Depends what you think a driverless car is and what your expectation of it is. There are already cars sold in the market where you can step out of it, walk away from it, and it will park itself. That I'd describe as a driverless car. It has the sensors, it has the interface, it has the control systems that allows it to move around, sense its surroundings, and carefully park. So they're already here. The technology is already mature, but is applied in very specific use cases, low speed, defined environments. But that's driverless. The next thing that we expect to come to mass production vehicles that you'll be able to walk into a dealership and buy will be cars that when you pull up to the boom gate at a car park, you can step out of, push the button, and it will go and find a vacant spot in the parking building for you. And I've demonstrated this already and shown videos of it. This is a now technology and is coming to mass production by 2018. So that's already on its way. And the reason that's first is, again, low speed, defined environment, low risk. Conditions don't change very much. So it's easier for us to develop and implement the technology and to get it certified and released. When you get out into the open road...
Presumably your car tells you where it's parked so you can find it again.
Not necessarily. No, honestly. Because when you come back to the parking building, you say, I'm here.
And
it brings itself back to the boom gate and you climb in.
Right.
Shame I don't have the memory stick. We could stick it in and show you that video exactly. But there are many steps then which will get to outside defined environments and open public roads.
So it's more of a sort of transition of bit by bit, increasingly autonomous rather than...
And as Peter said, in complex urban environments, we think these vehicles are 2025 and beyond.
Okay, we'll take another question from over here.
Peter mentioned the generational shift we're facing where particularly young people don't want to get licences, and I think some 50% of young people under 26 who could have a licence haven't gone down that track. And that leads me to ask about the concern with driverless vehicles, with the potential increase in congestion through the 20-30% of total driving age people who aren't licensed, who could well be just book a driverless car, and we have a massive increase. Children, people being sent to school by parents with a driverless car, with a whole heap of alternatives. So how is this? So my first question is, how is this to be managed? And maybe that can be written into the system. Peter mentioned sharing. And I think that's obviously got to be the key, because that increases the efficiency of the motor vehicle. Sole occupant vehicles are inefficient. And
so I'll ask you a second question as well.
And the second one is, how do you see this integrating with road user charging in terms of managing the road system? This is something Infrastructure Victoria has just recommended as being replacing excise and registration and other.
So road user charging is a way of managing
who will be
traffic
paying it?
congestion
People
and so on.
If people don't own the cars, who actually does all that? And and maybe this is how it's already happening in Columbus, Ohio.
The first question is what the scenario I think of as the heaven or hell scenario. So some of my colleagues say so heaven will be if these driverless vehicles aren't privately owned and therefore are owned by cities or fleets or some operator. And hell will be that there's going to be private ownership in a big way, and we're going to have multiple driverless machines, each of us, and when we go out to the restaurant, we're going to have one circling the block, while we're dining and having some nice wine, and then we're going to get in this thing and go home, you know. And we already know that a lot of the congestion in city streets is just simply
people looking for parks.
People looking for somewhere to park. So Gavin's immediately solved that problem. So that's going to make a huge difference. But you know, this isn't the way I view it is we don't have a God-given baseline for how much we get out of our lives, and if we were able to do more with our lives, then and be sustainable. And don't forget, these vehicles are much lighter than anything that we've known before because they don't crash. They're, as Gavin said, I didn't say this, but he said it, and he's right, they're electrified. So we've got something, they're shared, we've got something that's sustainable. The things, we could keep doing it for 100 years and we're not going to ruin the planet or anything like that. So we probably could do a bit more. And, you know, I know there's a lot of people who think about, you know, we got to reduce the number of cars, but these aren't cars. This is a different concept altogether.
One of the things that I was talking about earlier in the week as well is that we build extremely expensive infrastructure to cope with peak load. Peak load is for 20% of the day. The rest of the time, the infrastructure isn't being sweated. It's redundant. It's the same with power. We build power stations to cover those 2 hot days in summer where everyone turns their air conditioning on. Roads are the same. We give over 40% of our inner cities for parking. 40% of the real estate is just consumed for somewhere to put your car while you're off doing something else. 30% of the time and cost associated with a trip into the city is consumed looking for somewhere to park. That means 30% of the cost, 30% of the emission, and 30% of the time that you're running around creating congestion is a nonsense. So all of the things that we're talking about are so fundamental to improving the efficiency in the network, taking cost out, making people's lives more comfortable, reducing emissions. It, for me, is such a no-brainer. Whatever we can do to accelerate it.
I'm just aware we're running out of time. So
there was a second question about the charging startup, right?
Yeah.
Which is interesting because Gavin didn't want to talk about that because electric vehicles don't pay anything, right? So so that's part of the reason why. And you know, in the US, the Highway Trust Fund keeps having to be topped up mainly because the fuel economy of cars in the US has increased to a degree that I don't think people appreciate how much more efficient they are now. And so that means that the gas tax goes down and down. So what do? So we have to go to some sort of user charging scheme. And of course that will happen. And it might be by the mile or it might be by the minute. I think we're really going towards an on-demand mobility service that we pay for by the minute.
More like our mobile phone contracts.
And it's all part of the
charge. Question answered, because we're talking around the issue on extraneous.
We're not going to have time to go back to that. We've got several other people waiting and we're running out of time. Sorry to cut you off. But
no point asking a question if you don't get it answered.
Just on the road user charging, I'll try to answer that. One of the things we've looked at in terms of road user charging is that because you're losing your excise money from the reduction in fuel consumption, we will probably need to be charging per unit time and based on the demand on the road at that point in time. So if there's a lot of traffic, there's congestion, you're going to be paying more to use that section of road. The distance of the journey that you travel will be a factor in your total cost for that journey, bearing in mind that you are probably not going to own the vehicle that you're in. So that's going to be a cost that is part of a subscription that you pay to use that service.
Finally, thank you all for coming tonight, and most importantly, please join me in thanking our panellists, Peter Swetman, Kim Thomas and Gavin Smith. Thank you very much.